It's finally here, bros. The game we've all been waiting for with bated breath. The Kingsfield remake. Well, the demo featuring just the first zone anyways. Oh, right. I guess there was DLC or something that came out for that other game too. But really, who gives a shit? It's Kingsfield time, motherfuckers! Honestly, I was surprised just to know that this was still even being worked on. It feels like it was so long ago we got an update on it, but I expect at this point, eventually down the line, the entire game will be released too. The Kingsfield franchise is near and dear to my heart, and Kingsfield 2 is my favorite in it as well, so you can imagine how happy I was to learn about this news. Anyways, it does an excellent job updating the graphics and gameplay without really undermining the whole style of the game. That's right, it changes a lot about how the game works too, but let's start with the graphics first. Visually, the main difference is the dynamic lighting added in. Everything is generally darker than it was before, which I think fits the tone and spirit of a dungeon crawler much more. Hell, you can even destroy some lighting sources to make the areas even darker, though it doesn't seem to affect anything gameplay-wise. But if you wanted to look more old school, you can always turn down the graphics to low if you're happy enough with just the other changes. The animations for enemies look a lot more natural, or well, at least as natural as they could look on some of these admittingly absurd minimalistic designs. The Kraken boss has a cool entrance when you approach his cave too, as opposed to just sitting there. He even gets some fresh new attacks along with his tentacle swings. With the new particle effects, spells feel like they pack more of a punch, and you even get cute little updated animations that play when you use the spell crystal items. The biggest change in the remake, besides obviously the stable frame rate, is all the tweaking to certain gameplay aspects. For one, you might recall that in the PS1 version, when you drain all of your stamina by running, there's a significant delay to when it starts recharging again. Here, it works more like the ancient city, where it pretty much always recharges instantly once it's drained. Another change is that your turn speed can be customized, and at default it's way faster than it was before. The AI has been greatly improved too, being way more aggressive, even chasing you into areas they usually could never access. They won't chase indefinitely though, and unfortunately there's currently a massive exploit with the AI where you can drag them to the edge of their aggro range, and then they will automatically turn around to try to return to their spawn. This allows you to get in cheap hits, and theoretically you can just do this with every enemy in the game without learning how to move around them and avoid their attacks. Their tracking seems stronger as well, to counterbalance the faster turning of the player. For anyone unaware, tracking is the AI's ability to, well, track the player as they're moving, or how fast they turn relative to the player. It's nothing crazy at least, so it still feels fair, but you have to utilize running more to get in a good position around a lot of enemies now. One interesting change is the addition of limb cutting, though there is a problem with the rewards of it. In some cases the benefits are obvious, like ripping off the arms of an enemy and having that entire half of their body safer to move around, but then you have the option of taking off the shells of the squid enemies. I guess the idea is you make them squishier when you remove it, but usually they're only a couple more hits away from death anyway, and more than likely you're just gonna kill them by attacking them mindlessly regardless. If you're fighting skeletons, you can decapitate them, and it doesn't appear to have any effect, which just makes you wonder why it even lets you do that at all aside from it looking cool. Some enemies have new attacks and abilities, and some existing attacks have been reworked a bit. For instance, the squids inside the Kraken cave usually only fire off one fire projectile, but now they fire two at once. This is more of a personal point, but I always wish there was more to this cave in general. It's a really tiny pocket of an area, and I thought it was so strange in the original to have this optional cave here with unique variants of the squid enemies, only to have you fight like 5 of them and never see them ever again. An example of a new ability besides the Kraken range spell I mentioned is that skeletons can block attacks now. I like the idea of it since it means you have to fight them a little differently from the other enemies. Usually they'll put up a pose to signal they're in defense mode, though the frames where they block attacks must start very early in their animation, because sometimes you'll attack them when they aren't in the pose and they'll just kinda block attacks randomly anyways. Speaking of attacks, in the PS1 version of the game, it can be pretty easy to stun enemies right as their attack animation starts, but now it seems they have some kind of late Soulsborne style poise, where their attacks can't be interrupted once they start unless you flat out kill them. It's a great change to make fights feel more fair for the enemy, and punishes you for being overly reckless. Another thing is you can hit multiple enemies at once with a single swing, giving you more agency in enemy group encounters. In general, the remake feels much faster paced. It seems more interested in keeping you in the fray until the fights are over, and this is also reflected in how pausing in the inventory works. That is to say, nothing in the game pauses at all now, including the pause button. Everything from the inventory to picking up items are done in real time. I can accept not letting me easily run around enemies and picking up items, but I seriously hate how neither pausing or using the inventory stops anything now. I don't even like it in Dark Souls when pressing the start button doesn't stop the action, and this game doesn't have the excuse of having online components. I mean, God forbid someone starts talking to you in real life when you're in the middle of a fight. As far as the inventory goes, I don't know, man. I feel like if you're going to prevent me from pausing the action with the inventory, you should give me more ways to quick select items. I mean, when you look at all the other games that implement real-time inventory systems like Dead Space, Resident Evil 5, Dark Souls, or System Shock, there's usually a way for you to bind several items and weapons to hotkeys, so you can still adapt to situations as they're happening. As is with the single shortcut key, it just feels restrictive more than anything. I mean, what if I had the wrong item on my shortcut key? What if I realize I need to switch weapons to apply more damage? What if I want to use several different types of spells in a fight? Now I either have to live with what I got, or run far away just to swap weapons when before I could do it on the fly. And I can only imagine what effect this will have later in the game when you're locked into arenas fighting bosses. There are a few other changes like item placement, though most of it is true to the original, and I imagine what few changes are done are just for the sake of the demo. For instance, you get the skull key right in the first area, so you can explore that cave behind the waterfall. Some rooms have twice as many enemies, and in the case of the skeletons, some of them wear armor. Sadly, the armor is just a visual thing. Even if you kill skeletons with armor, they will drop it on the floor, but it will despawn a couple seconds afterwards, and you can't actually pick them up at all. It really sucks actually, because the first time I saw the armored skeletons, I thought, ooh, that's cool, now I get a visual hint that these guys are going to drop armor pieces, and it turned out to just be nothing. It doesn't even make them tankier. For spells, they mostly work the same so far, though for some reason Windcutter goes through geometry now, which makes cheesing encounters way easier. One neat change is that part of the intro cinematic is playable, specifically the part where you go up the tower to stare off at the island. Admittingly, I didn't experiment with it too much, but from what I tried, the music seems to be well designed to account for the player dicking around on their way up to the top. I didn't notice any bizarre sound cutoffs. The way the track transitioned from one part to the next seemed natural. Granted, it's a little strange that the intro doesn't appear until the end of the demo, but whatever. To talk about the difficulty for a moment, while it is definitely a bit harder, some strategies like circle strafing are still a bit too easy. Now you could argue that this is fair enough given it's the first area of the game, but in order to maintain its signature difficulty, I think generally speaking it would be wise to implement more alternative attacks that enemies can do if the player is standing around or behind them. You can even try to tie this into the limb cutting mechanic, so you can take away offensive options from the AI, and there's more of an element of strategy to the fights. That was always a weakness in the simplicity of the earlier Kingsfield games. Their AI was very basic, and they usually didn't have more than one or two attacks. And in my opinion, if we're already changing so much about how it plays, we might as well try to prevent the combat from being too easy to autopilot over. I think it would feed well into the tension and suspense of a dungeon crawler too. I'm not advocating for it being hard just for its own sake, but to really drive home that you're isolated on a dangerous island full of monsters. Also, this was an exploit you could always do, but I think it's stupid that you can just cheese the Kraken boss from range without penalty. Like, if you're gonna give the boss new range attacks, you might as well ensure they go far enough to prevent the player from just AFK spamming magic from the side. That way you at least still have to dodge during the process. Now, I'd like to move on to the more long-term concerns I have about the remake going forward. So far, we've got a strong start, but I think we could go further with streamlining multiple aspects of the game to kind of cut down on those nagging issues of the original game that I really want to get off my chest. Some people would argue it's best to be as purist as possible, but I think it would be better to make things more convenient for the player, and even rework certain unbalanced aspects of the game. Going back to the inventory for a moment, first of all, right now there's an issue where if you try to keep going when you reach the top of the list, it won't just move down to the bottom or vice versa. It did do this in the PS1 version, but it probably just hasn't been programmed in yet. Just throwing it out there that this is a problem. Second of all, the way that your inventory organizes information is different than it was in the old version, which is super confusing if you're used to how it usually works. But besides that, I think for the sake of allowing players to tailor their experience, there should be a way to change how items are sorted in the inventory. Also, when it comes to changing equipment, I've always found it obnoxious and clunky how you have to just memorize the stats for individual gear if you want to try on something else. I think it'd be awesome if the game had indicators if you are increasing or losing value in certain types of damage or defense. It'd be nice if you got some kind of marker for any new items you picked up that you haven't looked at yet too. Another thing is the conversation window. This wasn't introduced until Kingsfield 3, but it was nice for reminding you of hints and lore information. I see no reason it can't be in this game too. Now, let's get into something a little spicy. What might be my most controversial recommendations. Now, it's no secret that the economy in these games tends to be broken. You get way too much money too easily, and being able to stock up on an infinite amount of items like healing herbs can be a problem for maintaining the game's tension and difficulty. I feel healing items should at least be a little more expensive, and certain key items like the Pirates map should have their gold sell value nerfed, so you can't just get several thousand gold right off the bat. Basically, you want players to highly value their gold, and while you want selling items to feel important, you don't want to give them too much at once for selling singular items. You want them to be very particular about consumables. And honestly, the game already has crystal flasks, which basically act as the game's equivalent to Estus flasks in Dark Souls. So there's no real reason to allow players to stack up so many of them on top of infinitely refillable flasks. For instance, maybe you can make it so you can only carry 20 herbs at once. This would have massive ripples throughout the game though. It could take a long time to fine-tune everything to account for this reworked economy and try to find a good balance between keeping exploration tense while not making it too easy to get soft-locked. Another thing is item descriptions. Now I get it, the idea is you need to talk to the fortune teller to know what items do, but in my opinion it's fucking terrible design. This creates a lot of awkward moments where you miss out on key information that can help you in fights. Say for instance, a certain item gives you some kind of damage buff, or it makes you immune to poison. You'd have no idea until super late into the game. This really fucks with the shop system too, because why the hell would you buy an item for several thousand gold when you have no idea what it even does? A smarter player would only use the store to buy armor, weapons, and consumables early, if you're gonna really use it much at all, since most items can be found for free just by exploring. So you'd only be using a small part of the stores throughout the game. Even when you access the fortune teller, you still can't know what items do unless you've already bought them and showed them to her. You could waste money on an item that doesn't help you at all, and you wouldn't know it until the deed is done, resulting in you wasting money or having to reload a previous save. It makes it harder to mix up your playstyle in subsequent playthroughs too, since you have to either constantly refer to a guide or wiki to know what items do, or try to memorize each item's effect. Also, I wish there was a way to store items to keep your inventory from getting too cluttered with redundant shit. I think it would be better to know what keys are designed for what doors too, as I would argue nothing of value happens otherwise. It just gets you in the nasty habit of trying every individual key to see which one works on any locked doors you find. Hell, maybe when you have the right key, we can just make it so it automatically uses the key once you interact with the door. Speaking of terrible design, we have the inescapable traps that require you to use the teleportation items to leave them. There was zero indication what was inescapable and what wasn't. Either you had the items for it, or you completely wasted your time going into an area only to realize you have to reload a save and come back later. Either there needs to be more of an indicator that you need the gate items for these parts, or there needs to be secret walls inside them that allow you to escape as long as you explore enough of them. While we're on the topic of secrets, I think it's about time we address the wall humper in the room. Now, the original game was honestly pretty hit and miss with its secrets. Some of its secrets were genuinely well designed, and as long as you paid attention, you could kind of intuit where certain secret doors were. A lot of the time, though, it was completely random, resulting in you autistically humping every flat wall you come across, which unfortunately makes up 80% of the map geometry, making exploration more tedious than it needed to be. We could easily fix this problem by just going with the ancient city approach. In that game, anytime there was a secret in a room, it was only in rooms with flat walls. If there wasn't a secret, the walls were jagged or parts of them jutted out in a way that made it obvious that there were no secrets nearby. We could even have the classic crack in the wall hint that you can break down to reveal a tunnel. Well, that's the end of my thoughts. Either way, I'm super excited for the remake, and I'm hoping it'll actually get more people introduced to the franchise as a whole. As always, I'm curious how y'all feel about it, and there will be a link in the description and in the Discord server for the demo if anyone wants to try it themselves. Anyways, have a great day, and see y'all later, and whatever.